Hello and welcome to this latest Hinckley and Bosworth podcast. I'm Michael Mullaney, local councillor and executive member for Community Safety, Council Housing and Voluntary Services. And today we're going to discuss devolution and the future of Hinckley and Bosworth and whether the local council can actually continue to exist, because you may have heard that the government has plans to abolish all the local boroughs and districts in England and create mega councils that could be 350,000 or even 500,000 people in them. And we may end up here in Leicestershire, perhaps with one authority covering all of Leicestershire and Rutland. So there's a lot of issues to discuss today about how this will affect people in their everyday lives in Hinckley and Bosworth, how this will affect the local community. Is going to have one big council for the whole of Leicestershire going to make things much more distant for people if we get rid of local councils like Hinckley and Bosworth? So today we're going to discuss that and discuss the problems that we see with the government's plans and really look at why we think it's important that you should continue to have local authorities like Hinckley and Bosworth that can represent local people. So joining me today to start with for today's discussion is Councillor Stuart Bray, who is leader of Hinckley and Bosworth Council.
Hi, Michael.
Afternoon, Stuart. So can you just sort of set out in summary what you think the main concerns you have with moving away from having a local Hinckley and Bosworth Council to having one big authority for Leicestershire?
Well, I think the first thing to say is this has come totally out of the blue. It wasn't in the government's manifesto in the run up to the elections. It sort of landed with us while we were all doing our last minute Christmas shopping just before Christmas for this new white paper where they announced that they were going to bring in devolution. Now, there's two parts to this proposal. First of all, they want to bring in elected mayors like they've got in Manchester and elsewhere, and even in Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire closer to home, and make sure that all areas have got one of these elected mayors. But the second half was also that they wanted to reorganise local government and, as you say, abolish the two-tier system that's existed here in Hinckley Bosworth for 50 years and replace it with a single unitary council. Hot off the press from the government's announcement, the county council rushed out an announcement to say that what they wanted was one big unitary council covering the whole of Leicestershire and possibly Rutland too. So, as you say, it would be a massive council of nearly 750,000 people. And I've got several concerns with that. I think the first concern I have is about decisions being taken closer to people. The local knowledge, the things that, councillors elected in and around Hinckley taking decisions in and around Hinckley, to me is the best way of doing it. If they moved this way, you could have councillors in Leicester, Loughborough, Melton, even Rutland taking decisions about what goes on here in Hinckley and Bosworth. And I think that is very much a backward step. The second concern I have is that I think it will end up people paying more council tax. Because at the moment, people in Hinckley and Bosworth pay the lowest levels of council tax in the county and one of the lowest in the country. And what is likely to happen is when they harmonise all the council tax rates, it will see bills rise. And the third thing, and I think this is perhaps my most biggest fear, is I can see services being lost. Because as you know, Michael, and I've been a county councillor since 2009, as well as being a district councillor. And what happens is, with County Hall, every single year, services reduce, because they've got ever-increasing bills in things like special educational needs and adult social care. At the moment, the Borough Council provides services like empties your bins, it collects council tax on behalf of all the other councils, it does the planning, it does housing, and a whole range of discretionary services which we don't, by law, have to do. These include economic development, all the town centre event stuff that we do, stuff around community safety, CCTV, we provide welfare support, and I think we're going to talk a little bit later in the podcast to some of the people who run those services. And all these discretionary services that we do because we think it is important, but we are not required by law to do, I think will go as these new councils are brought in. Maybe not in year one, but as costs keep going up for adult social care, funding will be sucked out of these services and we'll see these things go. And I think that would be a real shame for Hinckley and Bosworth people.
Yes, and I think one of the big things that the government is using to try and justify this move is to say it's going to save money. And I think there's actually evidence to say this isn't necessarily the case, because I know that in Shropshire some years ago they did this. They got rid of all the local borough district councils and had one huge council for Shropshire. And now the leader of that council is saying they're in real financial difficulty as well. So do you not think it might be a sort of worst case scenario that actually they do something to try and save money, it doesn't save money, and it just means that people find the decision making is further away from them, they lose that local contact from an authority that represents them in Hinckley and Bosworth, they have a much more distant authority, and it doesn't save money anyway?
Well, the government have done some of these reorganisations elsewhere in the country, and the costs of bringing the councils together, making staff redundant in a lot of places, has cost millions and millions of pounds. That's not my figures, they're LGA figures. And this reorganisation, it will cost billions to just go through the process of doing it. So if it is going to save money, it will be many, many, many years in the future before it starts to have any sort of payback. And I just don't think it will save money, because what will happen is, if you take out the services, things like, for example, health prevention measures that districts and others provide as a discretionary service, if you take out all these services that sort of keep people healthier for longer, what's going to happen is costs of the NHS are going to rise. So it's not going to save public money at all. It's in most cases, it's false economy.
Yes, and I think where they've had the reorganisation in places like Cumbria and Somerset, the evidence is it ended up costing tens of millions of pounds in the short run. So as you say, if that is then replicated across the whole of the country, and isn't there also an issue actually just of the huge disruption of it, because it's going to mean that people, you have to get rid of councils, you have to try and create a new one, there's going to be a lot of uncertainty. Do you not think that in terms of the ability to deliver services, if people are having to spend all their time working on reorganisation, that's going to impact the quality of services that people see delivered on the ground?
Absolutely. And if you talk to some councillors in some of these places that have been reorganised 2-3 years ago, I'm still being told of horror stories where IT systems in one part of the old councils don't talk to other parts of IT systems. So it's going to end up with services being massively disrupted for many years to come.
One of the things I find when talking to people is that they often find government is very distant. People feel as if decision making is taken without them being involved. They feel as if they're not really part of the system. And do you not think that moving away from a local authority where at least, the councillors local, the people making decisions live in the town village they represent, there's an authority which is a manageable size, that getting rid of that really would mean the end of local government? And if you were to move to one authority for Leicestershire, or even two, you'd be looking at an authority representing 350,000 or 500,000 people. And that really that would mean that government would just seem even more distant, and people who already are perhaps reluctant to bother voting because they don't think it makes a difference or they don't see it affects their everyday lives, that actually it's just going to make things even more impersonal and as if things are being done to people rather than involving people.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you are a resident in Hinckley, Burbage, Barwell, or even out in further out in the villages, surely it is better to have councillors elected who are accountable, who live on the doorstep, rather than decisions being taken by people who live in Loughborough, Melton, elsewhere in the county. And I think this is why, and I think it's important to note that the government have made it very clear, no change is no option. They are going to force this through whatever, without, as I say, without any mandate at all. And the thing that some of the things that really annoyed me, and these points were made in the council meeting that we had, is there has been no consultation. Not a single person has been consulted on any of these proposals. They're just proposing to ram it through. And what the county council's response is to have one unitary council, and I think that is the worst of all worlds, because what will happen is you've got a massive council with Leicester City in the sort of middle of the donut, which will be probably expanded outwards, taking some of the suburbs, and then the rest of the county will be governed by another council. Now, what the 7 districts plus Rutland are saying is, actually, if we've got to have unitary councils, then it would be better to have smaller unitary councils based on a collection of the current districts rather than one massive county council, which is going to be so remote and so out of touch. Absolutely seems concerned. It's a disaster. As far as I'm concerned, it's a disaster across the board. People will pay more, they'll get less, and they'll get heard less. And that is why, to me, these devolution plans mean.
So, if you are concerned about the plans for the future of local government in Leicestershire, then we would urge you to have your say. Please look out for information on how you can take part in a consultation on the future of local government in Leicestershire. There's issues about whether we're going to just have one authority for all of Leicestershire. It may be they decide to have 2. So please look out for any information on how you can contribute, and we would be particularly keen on seeing any individuals or community groups in Hinckley and Bosworth that think this is a bad idea. Please look out for ways to have your say, to tell the government, to tell those who are making the decisions that you think they should think again and reconsider what is being planned, because we think the most important thing is ensuring we can still have a local government that's accountable to local people, that's part of their everyday lives. And if we feel that's at risk, it would be good if people could write in and give their views. So please look out in future for consultation on that. I'm now going to be joined by Amie Carroll, the Communities Manager, and Helen Tong, Welfare Support Officer. Over to you, Amie. Do you want to give an overview of what the welfare support package is that's delivered by the borough?
Yeah, so Hinckley and Bosworth has a welfare support service that was originally established in response to COVID. So those people that found themselves in financial hardship as a result of being furloughed, and as the pandemic ended, it evolved into a cost of living response. And we, as a borough council, we declared a cost of living emergency in 2022. And in response to that, we extended the welfare support service to support people in financial hardship, to help them with things like income maximisation, budgeting and benefits advice, and we can also look at kind of emergency food parcels for those really having to choose between eating or heating, for example. And welfare support service is a very well used service that we have around first 3 quarters of this year. We've assisted 1,200 people with in financial hardship, and 71% of those were first time users of the service. So it shows you that the cost of living crisis is by no means ending, and that's, I feel, it's an invaluable service for Hinckley and Bosworth residents, and to my knowledge there's not another service that other local authorities within the county provide. So it's unique to Hinckley and Bosworth, and it is easily accessible for any resident, or regardless of their housing tenure, to access financial hardship advice through the Borough Council.
So that's a good example, Amie, of how a local council can prioritise its own decisions for its own local community that other councils might not find a priority. As you say, it was the only district that delivered that kind of service. And as you say, a large number of people have used the service, which shows that clearly there's a demand that, sadly, because of the cost of living crisis and how people are struggling, a lot of people are needing this support. And as you say, a lot of them are first time people coming for support. So it shows it's affecting people who perhaps in the past haven't had to get support, but do need it now because of the economic situation that people are in. I mean, does it worry you that the future of the service could be at risk if we got rid of Hinckley and Bosworth Council?
It certainly does. I think there is, if the welfare support service wasn't to exist within Hinckley and Bosworth, it would have a major impact on the voluntary community sector. For example, citizens' advice. Not only that, it would have huge impact on our rural communities. As a welfare support service, we go out to our rural communities, we take the service out to them because we're aware of, community transport issues as well. Whereas I'm not sure that other services would be able to provide that accessibility.
So, Amie, in terms of the support that we offer to people in the community, can you think of particular examples of people whose lives have been benefited and helped through difficult times by the support we offer?
Yeah, I think there's plenty of cases where we've supported people through some really traumatic times. For example, one of our cases lost their husband, and all the finances were dealt with by the husband. So it was the first time that she was having to deal with all that finances. So we supported her through the financial side, but also were able to refer her on to other agencies with that emotional and mental health support as well at a really difficult time. And also throughout emergency situations, so such as the Ratby gas outage, we were able to put in welfare support officers long after the gas was reinstalled to help residents who'd been financially affected by not having gas throughout that period. So we were able to get that localised support as well.
Yes, one of the advantages of being a relatively small area is that you can really concentrate on supporting people in each of those local communities. And I think the worry is that if you end up with a huge super authority covering 350,000 or 500,000 people, then a lot of, particularly the villages, which may only have a few hundred people, may seem invisible to a new, bigger authority. Another example of how the welfare support services have helped people is the uniform swap that has happened in Hinckley and Bosworth. So, Helen, do you want to explain how that's helped in the local community during these difficult times?
Yeah, so last summer we actually operated our first uniform swap shop to try and meet the needs of those households that are struggling on low incomes, particularly to be able to afford school uniform. It's not particularly cheap, especially when it's low load, and so we wanted to try and help that. So we actually had 9 venues across the borough, including co-ops and community venues, which actually represented 50 schools across the borough. And the idea being that people would donate good quality uniform and didn't need any more, and then people who did need the uniform could come and pick that up from a local venue and reuse it. So obviously that helped save money, but it also sort of stopped the amount of clothing going to landfill as well, which was good. So in terms of how successful that was, it's hard to measure, but we did find that there was a 4% decrease in food bank referrals over the summer, which is usually a very busy time for the food banks. And we also tried to get the information out across social media as well. One of the posts, I think it got about 11,500 responses and 600 engagements. So it was definitely a success. And as a result of that, we want to try and do something in the Easter holidays. So we'll be covering all April. We're going to have some venues again where people can donate school uniform, but also be able to pick that up as well. So
my concern would be that local knowledge and intelligence that might be lost within moving to another authority, because, for example, although 71% of service users or first-time users, we do have quite a lot of repeat users accessing local schemes such as on discretionary housing payments, which only lasts for 6 months, but unfortunately many families come to rely on that payment, and we do a lot of referrals into the discretionary housing fund to support those families. And that local knowledge, where perhaps on paper some of our rural villages might look quite financially well off, but they are asset rich, but actually they're cash poor in the day-to-day living. Quite often you have elderly people living in quite large houses, which means it's largely not cost effective to heat. So, having that local knowledge to be able to go out to community venues and find those people and support those people is what I'm concerned about, even.
Yes, I mean, the thing about local government is it should be local, and by having an authority the size of Hinckley and Bosworth, it can be that kind of size where you get to know people, know where the local authority is. Okay, well, thank you for coming in today. I think it's really shown how these discretionary services that local councils can make a choice to deliver, and Hinckley and Bosworth made a choice to deliver these services to local people, can make a real difference to people's lives, particularly through these difficult times of a cost of living crisis. And if you move away from a local authority that represents a set community to a really big, much more impersonal, large authority, you could lose that kind of local information and also local services that authorities make a choice to deliver. So thank you very much today for coming in, Helen and Amie, and thank you for all the good work you've been doing in the communities in Hinckley and Bosworth. Recently, we had a meeting of Hinckley and Bosworth Borough Council where all councillors had the opportunity to discuss and debate the plans. A motion was put opposing the plans to get rid of Hinckley and Bosworth Council. This was passed overwhelmingly. There were lots of speeches from different councillors from different parts of the borough, from Hinckley, Burbage, Barwell and rural areas, all setting out their views. These are all available online in full to watch from the Hinckley and Bosworth YouTube channel. But we're now going to just put a series of clips from various councillors that really highlights the various key points that we think are most important in this debate and the issues that we think really show why moving away from a local form of government to something much bigger and distant is a bad thing for people in Hinckley and Bosworth. I'm sure that all of us support devolution, decision-making being made as locally as possible. It is therefore sad that what is being billed by the government as a plan for devolution is in fact the complete opposite. It is a plan for centralisation, to forcibly abolish the borough of Hinckley and Bosworth and all the remaining boroughs and districts in England is a massive act of centralisation on a par with the local government changes of the early 1970s and the Tory government of the 1980s, abolition of the GLC and metropolitan counties, and like the previous acts of removing local government, it's being done with minimal consultation. The government seems to think that single county unitaries will be more financially viable. Now, some years ago, Shropshire scrapped all its districts and boroughs to create one unitary for the whole of Shropshire County, and yet recently Shropshire has been saying loudly and urgently that it is in desperate financial situations and close to financial collapse. So clearly going to unitary status is not a guaranteed solution to the problem of local government finance. The government seems keen on these plans to scrap boroughs and districts and create super councils, it seems, for two reasons. One, to save money, and two, to push through large-scale house building across the country more easily, but without providing the infrastructure and funding for public services that are needed to make that practical.
They're on about reducing costs. How do we know? Reducing workforce pressures. How the hell can an individual monitor what is going over the whole county of Leicestershire? It is physically impossible for whatever department they're in to be able to monitor the whole of Leicestershire. A county is a big area, and as we previously said, a lot of them have failed. They say they want 500,000, but it admits only 11 of the present 100 and whatever have 500,000 anyway. It's all right if you've got your 500,000 people in a similar area, similar workforce, similar transport situations. This county will never be in that position. I find this is strange. It seems as though the decision's made before the discussion's made.
You would have to put together a detailed business plan, working out the pros and cons, working out the costs, not just at a macro level, but also at a micro level for each local authority. We have nothing of that here. How will these costs be calculated? We're assured by the government there's going to be cost savings, but where are the cost savings? And there's no evidence in this white paper for large-scale cost savings. And as Councillor Sutton suggests, actually the costs might be greater, in fact. We've already seen, as Councillor Mullaney says, in some cases where local authorities have been merged into unitaries, the costs have gone up, at least in the short term. And frankly, Hinckley does not want to be run from Leicester. Barwell does not want to be run from Leicester. Market Bosworth does not want to be run from Leicester. And I think it's incumbent on us to stand up and say what we think is right and simply not just go with the flow and go with what we think is inevitable. If we think this is wrong, we should stand our ground and fight it.
All of those people are affected by what's here. Now, so let's look at the marketing exercise, because it's quite interesting, really. So if we go to the key headlines at 3.13. There's not many words there, Mr. Mayor, but it's the sales attempt to sell this. So we look at one, efficiency savings. That's fine. Let's do that. I'm more than happy for that. Let's be honest with people, because any restructuring exercise takes tens and tens and tens decades to actually get those savings back, because you can't rip up leases and agreements and infrastructure that's in place and just walk away from it without any penalty. Service transformation, that's a lovely word, isn't it? What service? Again, be honest with people, what service is failing? Because we've heard tonight about the events, and we know for a fact that a lot of good work's done by this council. I don't see that as service transformation, because we're already doing our best. So let's be honest again with people and say, what specific service is failing so badly that we need to make this restructure in order to improve that?
Jobs are under threat in order to supposedly save money. What's going to happen to events like Proms in the Park or Snapdragon? Will these events be seen as remote and unnecessary expenditure? I completely disagree with this plan and agree with all my colleagues who've spoken on this. Let's keep our council local, and maybe let's devolve services from central government.
I would encourage every single member of this council across all sides to go and knock on some doors over the next few weeks. I've been doing it through the cold, the wind, the rain, and I can guarantee not one person I've spoke to over the last 2 months of doing it has said this is a good idea. What they do say is the real value comes from the services we provide. It's our bins, it's our parks, it's things like the leisure centre. It's things that we are in direct control of that they get most value out of. The problems, well, that's potholes. That isn't us. That's waiting 3 years for a SEN certificate to say my child can have extra support. They are problems that are not to do with this council. We are just compiling the problem by saying go to a bigger unitary. Those problems do not go away.
And we've heard the response from the Conservatives. It's this power grab. We must scrap the districts. We're all going to have one council. Not a single person in this county has been consulted on whether they want one unitary council. They have no mandate. We've been asked about a referendum. They don't even want county council elections to put this to the people. And what that will mean, I could tell you now, if you go to the Grubies, the Markfields, the Ratbys, and all the other places around here and said, do you want to be part of Leicester? I know what the answer is going to be fairly emphatically, but not a single person is being asked for their view. And the pace that the government is seeking to move on this is incredible. It is dangerous. There is no scrutiny. There is no thought behind it. It is just this wham bam, let's do it.